Доброе утро, дорогие товарищи.
Good morning, dear comrades. Let us continue the tricks on car exploitation in winter. Once we already made a video about the effect of air recirculation on the heating rate of the cabin and the engine. This is useful for those with remote engine starting systems. The link to this video is given below, and here is a brief summary for lazy bears. When the recirculation is on and air is taken from the cabin, the heating of both the engine and cabin goes much faster, significantly faster. In our test we managed to warm up the cabin 3 times faster compared to the air intake from the street. Today we are playing a related game, but with a starting preheater. Let's say we have both a starting preheater, also known as a boiler, and the remote engine start. First, what is a boiler, if suddenly this knowledge is not of those you possess? This is a stove, which is embedded in the cooling system, and it is able to work autonomously, without starting the engine, to heat the coolant or antifreeze, which makes it possible to start the engine already in a warm state, which of course prolongs its life and improves its health. The boiler can actually be used in 2 ways from the point of view of pre-start heating. You can activate the climate system along with it and warm both the cabin and the engine, or you can turn on just the boiler and warm the engine only. So today we make it both ways and then compare them with each other. To do this, we carry out 2 measurements. One with the climate system on, the second with the boiler only. In both cases we allow the boiler heat for 20 minutes first, then we start the engine and let it idle for another 20 minutes to see what happens. After starting the engine, we begin to monitor the temperature of both the engine and the cabin, and then we compare and analyze what happens. Theoretically, it can be assumed that when a climate system begins to work immediately with the boiler, the interior warms up faster, well, because it starts to warm up earlier. At the same time, the engine will warm up less because part of the heat will go into the cabin. And thus, the answer to the question whether to connect climate control to the boiler sounds like this. What is more preferable for you, the engine or the cabin, the engine or your valuable body? Turn on the climate system if you prefer warm cabin, and don't do it if you care about the engine. There is one more nuance. The heater fan eats quite a lot of electricity. I was too lazy to measure the current, I looked only at the voltage. When the climate doesn't work, the voltage drop is 0.3 of a volt. If the boiler operates with the climate turned on, the fan makes the voltage drop 0.6 of a volt. That means the battery runs out of power much faster. That's it for the introduction. I'm itching to start the measurements. On the left, you see the figures. We start measuring at the very moment the engine starts naturally. Prior to this, our devices do not show anything. At the top, you see the engine started after the boiler was working together with the climate. Below, the boiler worked itself, and the first graph is absolutely expected. The blue graph shows the effect with the boiler only. At the moment of the engine start, the coolant is 55 degrees Celsius or 131 Fahrenheit. Together with climate system it gives 28 Celsius or 82 Fahrenheit. In reality, it makes a double difference due to the light freeze overboard. So, from the point of view of a warm start, of course it is better not to turn on the climate with the boiler. Further, on the blue graph you see such a failure at the very beginning. This means, after starting the engine, the climate detected a hot heater radiator, joyfully turned on the fan and took a lot of heat from the engine. Well then, after a minute literally, everything returned to normal. It began to warm up again. The red line grows up from the very beginning, but from a lower point, so it loses the start. And the difference between the lines is gradually decreasing. Starting from the 3rd minute, the difference is 10 degrees Celsius or 18 degrees Fahrenheit, and then less and less. Well, then they go almost as parallel lines. Basically, the result is as expected. There is no global difference in general if there is a light freeze overboard. You can probably make it both ways. The most significant difference in this case is the coolant temperature when the engine starts. From the point of view of possible problems with the engine cold start, well, of course, a higher temperature is much more preferable. The next graph is the fan speed. From 0 to 6 conventional bars, well, it's how it appears in my car. When we started with a hotter engine, it's the blue line, it starts immediately with 4 bars. 5 minutes later, it goes to full 6 and then reduces it because the cabin temperature is already more or less reasonable. The red line starts from scratch because the engine is actually still cold, and while the boiler was heating, the radiator of the stove was more or less warm. But as soon as we started the engine, cold antifreeze from the engine flew into the radiator of the stove, the climate got scared and turned off the fan. Therefore, we see the 3 bars, and in my car this is the minimum fan speed, at which at least some tangible amount of heat enters the cabin. It came out only after 5 minutes, and 4 bars appear after 6 minutes. 4 bars means you may take off your outer gloves if you place your hands close to the ventilation fans. Well, this is just for fun, for those who are interested in geek stuff. The next graph is the cabin temperature. Here, of course, a lot of things superimposed one on another, so let's throw the previous graphs away. Everything is clear with them. Now let's look at the temperature of the cabin only. The blue one, well, it's growing with a more or less constant speed until it reaches the ordered 19 degrees Celsius or 66 Fahrenheit. The red line you see failed at start because the fan turned off at the first moment and then began to slowly accelerate. The result, surprising to me, is that the blue actually overtook the red. Not much. Well, not so much, a couple of degrees Celsius or about 4 degrees Fahrenheit. It turns out that if we want to achieve both warm engine and warm cabin faster, we better use the boiler itself, without the climate system. Well, it's quite amazing. But the truth is, the first 7 minutes the difference will of course be in favor of a red line, because the cabin was already preheated. But if you have a remote engine start and your laws allow to idle in the parking zone, you're not in a car during these 7 minutes anyway. Yes, at the end of the line where the blue goes down there, do not pay much attention to this. The climate begins to move the dampers to give more heat to the glass, so the temperature in the cabin seems to drop. Subjectively, this is not felt at all. Now let's move on to conclusions. If you have both a boiler and a remote engine start, there is no reason to turn on the climate while the boiler is running. It takes more electricity and warms up more slowly, and I honestly do not see a single plus. Pluses appear only if you don't use the remote start or you do not have it and only hit the car with a boiler. Then okay, run it. If you want to get in a more or less warm cabin, it certainly makes sense to turn on the climate. But you must keep in mind that the electricity from the battery is devoured with twice as terrible force than without climate. Hope I don't scare you with it. So you can draw your own conclusions. Well, I provided the data, use it as you like. Good night. Subscribe to get it all warm.